AM radio, an op-ed column, and Fox News is not enough. I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. AM radio is the lowest form of communication. It's tinny, it's not robust, it's not Avatar. I want Avatar. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does.
The fake media is trying to silence us, but we will not let them, because the people know the truth. The fake media tried to stop us from going to the White House, but I'm president and they're not.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast, a Breitbart.com podcast. The podcast starts now. Here's Curt with today's headlines.
Hey, good morning, guys. Welcome to another edition of the Curt Schilling Podcast. Hope everybody had a great Labor Day and Labor Day weekend. Good show lined up. We've got Breitbart's Matthew Boyle joining us today, and we're going to be talking about a couple different things, including Breitbart's place in the media now that we're starting to see very aggressive moves from some social media giants to blacklist, to censor, whatever word you want to use, certain specific media outlets. And then after that, we're going to have our weekly roundtable, our weekly Second Amendment roundtable. Going to be joined by Mark Walters of Armed American Radio and Dr. A.W. Hawkins, our Second Amendment columnist here at Breitbart, and the host of Bullets with A.W. Hawkins, his Breitbart podcast. It's actually out today. Going to talk about the insane weekend in Chicago where 21 were shot. 10 people shot in one gunfight at a Southern California apartment complex. But 21 shot in Chicago. And a couple other things. Uber is the latest in a long list of liberal companies to voice their opinion on their Second Amendment. They suspended a driver who used a gun in self-defense. A legal, law-abiding citizen carrying a gun was suspended. Anyway, those are the guests today. But first, my favorite part here, we're going to start with NBC's Meet the Press. On Sunday, in Florida, they in the primary, the Democrats elected a full-blown socialist. And if you want to know where the left stands on big money and rich people, and they're always the party of the common man, which is a bunch of crap because California has the world's most billionaires and the worst poverty level. So, they are not who they say they are. Anyway, listen to Andrew Gillum. Listen to who he thanks for their support in his campaign and how appreciative he is of the money that these folks gave them. Listen up.
I'm obviously deeply appreciative of Mrs. Soros as well as Mr. Steyer, both men whom I've known for some time. But the truth is, Chuck, that our campaign was really propped up by a lot of small contributions, including my mother, who was on auto deduct of $20 a month into our campaign. In the first 2 days of this general election, our campaign has been buoyed this first week, raising over $2 million by everyday folks, not big contributions, but everyday folks sowing a seed into our race. And I honestly think that is what is going to help us win on November 6th is these everyday folks deciding to sow a seed into this race.
Do you think the Democratic Party is giving you enough support? I saw the Democratic Governors Association made a $1 million investment. It can sound like a lot of money, but this is the state of Florida. I think there's 17,000 media markets in the state of Florida by last count. I'm exaggerating slightly. $1 million. Some Democrats say there was a zero missing there. Do you think they're showing you enough support?
Well, I will tell you, Chuck, I have every anticipation and expectation that the DGA is going to come into this race strong. One, and you know this being a homeboy yourself, that the implications here in Florida are so great, not just in this race for governor and the cabinet, but also the United States Senate. I really do think the pairing of Bill Nelson and myself and the other members of the cabinet, not to mention the legislative races, are very, very critical for 2020 implications. And so I fully expect that they're going to come in and have our back. But the truth is that we're not going to wait or rely on that. We need everyday people to sow a seed into this race. We really are trying to run a campaign very similar to we run the primary, which is through the strength and the support of everyday folks willing to sow a seed into this campaign.
All right. So you heard the first two names, right? George Soros and Tom Steyer were the first two people he thanked, number one. And number two, the reason the DNC and the gang on the left haven't jumped into your campaign is because you're going to get absolutely crushed in the general election because you don't stand for or represent anything that this country was founded on. And by the way, a little known fact about Mr. Gillum, the candidate, who is currently under FBI investigation, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe his brother is as well. Not that that matters, because we know we don't tend to focus on things like that. But I thought that might be an important point. And then we move. And by the way, Chuck Todd, homeboy, really? You're a homeboy too, Chuck? The word homeboy is not one that comes to mind when I think of Chuck Todd, in addition to idiot and clown. CNN on Sunday basically endorsed a campaign. So Sleeping Giants was a group that came about after the last election that went around and basically, if you saw the movements online to David Hogg and all these others trying to shut down advertisers from advertising on different media outlets, and apparently one of their targets was Breitbart. Matt Rivets was found out to be the founder of this, but listen to CNN talk glowingly about what he's doing and what this is kind of how fascism becomes a thing. Listen up.
Right after the 2016 election, I was pretty disgusted with the tenor of the rhetoric coming out, just everywhere in the news, and it seemed very racist to me and bigoted, and just everything was seeming really inflammatory. And so, obviously, Steve Bannon was very much on the scene, and Breitbart was in the news a lot, and I actually hadn't heard of Breitbart before, so I went to the site and was pretty shocked to find a black crime section.
And you're looking at some of those headlines right now on the screen.
Yeah, so those headlines really got to me, and I'm in advertising. I'm in the advertising business, so I was just really curious as to who was supporting this from an ad perspective. And just going on the site, I saw it was a progressive loan company from San Francisco that was on there, and that felt pretty weird to me. So I just started this anonymous Twitter handle, and I just set it up and just tweeted at the company because I knew that companies generally have someone on the Twitter handle. And they got back to me within half an hour saying they had no idea they were there. So that obviously went from being just a few advertisers to being who knows how many, because it was being placed programmatically.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that you have to do when you run into somebody from the left, and it's becoming more and more obvious every day, is ask them to tell you what a progressive is, what socialism actually is from a real-world perspective, what fascism is, what a Nazi is. They understand none of that. They throw those words around as if it's giving them a position in a debate without understanding any of it. Fascism is basically the oppression of ideas, thoughts, and anything even overtly that you're against. Fascism is the squashing of ideals and ideologies not aligned with yours. Fascism is Antifa. If you want to know what fascists look like in public, look at Antifa. They're actually exactly what a fascist is. They will violently protest and physically attack people who they disagree with. That's what fascism, part of what fascism is. And then, but again, just ask them. On CNN's At this hour, I want you to listen to, this was on Monday's broadcast. This is, so you guys know Brett Kavanaugh's hearing started today. And Brett Kavanaugh is probably so overqualified it's embarrassing. He's received a well-qualified rating from the Bar Association, by the way, the American Bar Association, which rates judges. But I want you to listen. You're going to see, if you get a chance to watch them this week, you have to watch them just for the sheer lunacy, because you can't make this stuff up. The things that they say and do and the way that they act in public, you have to see it to believe. It's one of the reasons why we play these sound bites all the time, because it's hard to believe that they actually do these things. But I want you to listen to them. Former Hillary Clinton press secretary Brian Fallon stated, listen to his comment about any Democrat that votes for the confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh. Listen to what they're risking.
Well, this process that will take place this week, Kate, is a sham before it even gets started. And really, you have to go back to how Kavanaugh was selected in the first place. This is really the first time that you've seen a Supreme Court nominee put forward after a president named explicit litmus test that he would apply in terms of who he was going to pick. Donald Trump was very clear. He'd only pick people that would overturn Roe. He wanted a judge that would gut the Affordable Care Act. And he used two conservative outside special interest groups to help him vet these candidates. And then when they settled on Brett Kavanaugh, it turned out that he had the longest paper trail of any nominee in Supreme Court history. Mitch McConnell even warned against Trump picking him for that reason. Trump ignored that advice and picked him anyway. And when it turned out that the archives said we weren't going to be able to produce all his materials until late October, Senate Republicans in the Trump White House said, we'll hold the hearing on September 4th anyway. And as a result, there's 3.5 million pages of documents that are being concealed that senators have not seen prior to this hearing getting underway. At this point, you have to sort of ask, what's the point of even Democrats showing up? If I were them, I'd consider walking out of the hearing tomorrow. You cannot act like this is business as usual. As Amy Klobuchar said in that clip that you just played, this is not normal. I think Democrats need to respond in kind. Otherwise, they risk lending legitimacy to a process that is fundamentally illegitimate.
Right. Fundamentally illegitimate. I'm not sure how that works. And he promised to do nothing of the sort. During his he elected the judges he told us he was going to elect. Then you have on the right, Senator Grassley was on Fox and Friends yesterday. Listen to him talk about that very thing, the documentation and paper trail of Brett Kavanaugh.
Democrats are pretty much throwing everything but the kitchen sink at this guy.
They're doing it all from a process standpoint. You probably know that there's been very little criticism of the qualifications of Judge Kavanaugh. His 12 years on the D.C. Circuit, 307 opinions he's written, and those opinions, according to Schumer himself, voiced it earlier this year, and Leahy, back when Sotomayor was up in 2009 or 10, said that the best way to tell whether you ought to be on the Supreme Court is to look at the record you have as a district or circuit court judge. And so with 307 opinions, if it's good enough for Sotomayor, it ought to be pretty good for Kavanaugh. Right. So Democrats have the best record that even though their own leaders say that they need to have. So complaining about a certain amount of documents not being available when this Kavanaugh record is all the papers we have on him is 5 times. No, I shouldn't say 5 times. It's equal to or more than all 5 Supreme Court nominees prior to him. So we've got more documents on this person than anybody else in the history of the Supreme Court nominees.
Sure, but Senator, There's an election a couple of months from right now. The Democrats would like to take control of the House. They'd love to take control of the Senate as well. So they're going to use this guy to try to gin up the base and get people to come out. You know, we can't have this guy, tilting the Supreme Court to the right for a generation. How many Democrats ultimately do you think are going to vote for him?
If we keep 50 Republicans together so that they know that he's going to be approved, then I think we'll get 4 or 5 Democrats. But I don't think Schumer will let any Democrat make the 50th vote.
Right.
So, in other words, they'll have a free ride in a sense.
Yeah, so basically what he's saying is that back when Judge Sotomayor was being confirmed, the Democrats said the paper trail that she had was proof that she was a great judge, and that all she needed to do was have a body of rulings that proved their competency. And Judge Kavanaugh has as much of a paper trail that's already been revealed to everybody as the last 5 justices combined. 307 rulings. So by their standard, he's so ridiculously qualified, it's embarrassing. But now somehow they've turned that pile of that paper trail, into a negative. And finally, in the thank you for being alive and opening your mouth segment, on CBS News, former Secretary of State John Kerry talks about the coward-in-chief's red line during the administration and Syria strike. Listen up.
I want to ask you about another key relationship. Barack Obama. Specifically, you said, I never succeeded in persuading him to give me the tool I wanted most, greater leverage.
Correct.
What do you mean?
Well, from the moment I was nominated and asked, what about Syria, I said, we have to change Assad's calculation. And throughout the 4 years I was Secretary of State, and privileged to be so, I always raised the issue in the meetings we had about how we needed to change that calculation. I particularly believed that after Assad had been violating ceasefires, it was clear he needed to be taught a lesson. He needed to know that we were going to hold him accountable, and I raised that directly with the Russians, and I put several ideas on the table. The president was not persuaded by my argument. I believed that we had several options we could have done at very low risk to be able to make it clear to Assad that when we had a ceasefire and when he said he was going to live by it, he had to live by it. And I thought we should have done that.
Was he too risk-averse?
As I say in the book, my job and the job of anybody in a cabinet is to put an idea in front of the president, to argue the idea. The president is the decider. And there is no clarity by which I can say to you, I was 100% right, or the president was 100% wrong, or vice versa. Those are the judgments that are made by a president.
But do you think he was too risk-averse?
No, I think he had an attitude about Syria and a judgment about Syria. And he had a feeling about where that might take him if he made some of the decisions that I and others proffered.
Well, you write about this in detail. It's an entire chapter in the book. Because you, to be very frank, were hung out to dry here because you went on television.
I don't say I was
No, that's my characterization.
You know that.
I know that. I'm characterizing your retelling, though, where you went out and you made this prosecutorial, very careful argument about the chemical weapons attacks.
And what I write about is we paid a price for the way it played out without the red line being enforced by the bombing. But we got the chemical weapons out, which was the objective.
Even though there have been chemical weapons attacks since then.
We knew there were precursor chemicals, and we knew that there was chlorine, which when mixed, they still had ability. Those aren't declared. That's just the vagary of the system by which they
But there have been sarin gas attacks since then, so
yes, that is
under the Trump administration.
It's absolutely correct. And I supported President Trump's response to those partially. I supported the use of force, but I don't support just a one-off where you drop a few bombs and there's no follow-up diplomacy and no additional effort to try to use the leverage you get out of doing that. I thought that the president should have done that. President Trump should have done that. And
you thought President Obama should have done that,
yes,
too.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. How many different ways can you say he was wrong, but he wasn't wrong? which is what John Kerry was doing. Didn't have the guts to actually say what he said, which is he was hung out to dry. And that's one of the things that gets me about these guys on the left. Why would you want, same thing with Bernie Sanders, why would you want to put somebody in office that's too scared to stand up and speak for the things that they believe in? Bernie Sanders handed the Democratic primary and allowed the DNC to rig it, and his position was gone because of it. John Kerry, who basically in his book apparently says that Obama was left him hung out to dry, but I didn't write that. Yeah, they paid the price, and yeah, they did nothing, and Trump did what they should have done. So, anyway, we're going to take a short break. Breitbart's Matthew Boyle will join us after this.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Why did we see some of the Republican kissing of Mark Zuckerberg that was taking place?
I called it kissing the ring because I felt like every single person practically had to kiss the ring of this guy, who wants to do nothing except get all those people out of office. So, bizarre behavior from the Republicans.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Joining me now is one of the guys at the tip of the spear for Breitbart. He is on everything. He's actually kind of involved in our. He's watching and taking a peek at the confirmation hearings. He is Breitbart's Matthew Boyle. Good morning, Matt. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Kurt. What's going on, brother?
So talk about the lunacy so far. I mean, it just started, but the lunacy has already gotten deep, huh?
Yeah, the Democrats are completely off the rails in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. It's the first day of hearings. It's meant to be for opening statements for Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation to be an Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. They're completely out of order. Senator Cornyn, who is the Senate Majority Whip, he's the number 2 Republican in the U.S. Senate and a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, has already come out and said that the Democrats would be held in contempt of court if this were a court proceeding for their behavior that is, again, out of order in this committee hearing. They've been all screaming over each other. There's 17 people who have already been arrested at the hearing, protesters, leftists that attempted to disrupt the committee hearings. What we're seeing here is this is the kind of behavior the Democrats would engage in should they retake the House majority. And this is the kind of behavior that they think is acceptable. It's completely unbelievable. Judge Kavanaugh is an immensely qualified individual, overqualified for a position on the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Democrats' behavior here is just downright disgusting. We're seeing their true colors really come to the fore here.
Let me put that in context. The Senate Democrats have called the American Bar Association the gold standard for Supreme Court judges. The gold standard. The Senate Democrats have stated in the past that the American Bar Association is the gold standard for Supreme Court nominees. They have rated Judge Kavanaugh as well qualified for the U.S. Supreme Court before today. And apparently, as we know, that changes when the rubber meets the road. This is, and let's make no mistake about this, Matt, this is 100% about the right to an abortion and nothing else.
Yeah, and it's also about control. The Democrats are trying to fight for control of the U.S. Congress and the national political narrative. And this is what will happen if Nancy Pelosi takes control of the Congress, right? Like if Nancy Pelosi's back in charge and people vote for Democrats, you're voting for this insanity. And this is why these midterm elections are so important. Look, it all started at the beginning of the hearing with Kamala Harris and then Cory Booker, then Dianne Feinstein, and then Dick Blumenthal, and then Chris Coons. They're just completely insane. These people are 100% off the rails. And again, 17 people, according to the U.S. Capitol Police at this point, and I would imagine there's probably going to be more that we find out about later, because this is just in the first half hour or so. 17 people have been arrested. The Democrats, if this were a court proceeding, the Senate Democrats would be held in contempt of court, locked up. I mean, that's the behavior of these people is completely off the rails. It's completely unbelievable. They're shouting that they want to impeach Trump, that he's an illegitimate president, all this kind of stuff. Obviously, all of that stuff is not true. And so this is why the midterm elections are so important. I just can't keep stressing it enough. If the Republican base that supported President Trump in 2016 doesn't show up again in 2018, these people are going to impeach President Trump. Mark my words, it's happening.
Yeah, this has been from the Women's March in New York a year and a half ago through today. The Kavanaugh thing and the Trump appointment has always been about the right to an abortion. Nothing else. But to be very clear, nothing else. This is the only, because in the scheme of things, this is the only potential quote unquote right that is in jeopardy. And I would argue on a federal level, I'm not worried about it. But I do believe that Judge Kavanaugh will be one of those people that will support handing abortion rights back to the states. And if that happens, which is the way it should be, by the way, the left, that's the apocalyptic end of the world for the left, the right to have an on-demand abortion, which has basically been behind the genocide of the black community since Margaret Sanger in the early 1900s, or the early 20th century made it so. Let me ask you, what do you see at the end of this week?
Look, I think that Judge Kavanaugh is an immensely qualified individual. We'll see how he does in terms of committee questioning. So today was supposed to be opening statements back and forth all throughout the hearing, and then an opening statement in the early afternoon by Judge Kavanaugh for the hearings. And then tomorrow was supposed to be the beginning of questioning. There haven't been any questioning of Judge Kavanaugh yet, but and then Wednesday and Thursday are supposed to be questioning, and then Friday is supposed to be expert witnesses. But that seems to be kind of steering off the rails here as the Democrats engage in this behavior. So we'll see what happens over the course of the week. But I'd imagine that the hearings do proceed as planned by the Republicans by the end of the week. And then after that, there'll be about a week or so, and then there'll be the committee as a whole will vote about a week or so later to confirm Kavanaugh on purely partisan lines, and then the vote will go to the Senate floor by the end of the month.
Which if common sense prevails, he will be nominated to the Supreme Court. Only because we have a majority right now, but that is
right,
and that's the fear. I mean, and we talk about this, Matt. Well, I remember you and I talking back before the general election in 2016. No matter what you think about Donald Trump as a conservative American, no matter how you feel about his personality or any of the other stuff, a vote for Donald Trump is a vote for the Supreme Court, period. Because we knew he was going to have that one appointment, and we knew that there, and we know now there possibly could be another one or two in addition to this one.
There could be as many as three more.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
There could be as many as three more. There's talk that Justice Thomas may retire in the coming years, and then there's also talk that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is getting up there in age, so is Stephen Breyer. So there could be as many as three more appointments in the rest of his presidency, assuming he's a two-term president. But to get him to be a two-term president, people need to vote for Republicans in the midterm elections.
Yeah, and I do feel like, Matt, even though the media would tell you the left is all energized and blah, 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 I still believe that we're riding a very legitimate red wave in the sense that I don't think people are comfortable publicly defending this president, but in the voting booth, they're not worried about it at all. And I think and not that shouldn't make people sit back.
Yeah, and the one thing I would just say though is the Democrats don't need a blue wave to take control of the House, right? They only need to take 24 seats. That isn't a wave, but so that's why Republicans need to be especially careful, right? They cannot let their guard down. The people out there across the country need to be fired up in these final 2 months. And the Democrats' behavior in this committee hearing, as they've behaved in other committee hearings in the House and the Senate over the course of the past year and a half, has demonstrated this is the kind of behavior that they will engage in if they take the majority.
Yeah. Hey, real quick before we go, Nike released its new campaign yesterday, over the last couple of days. And the fact of the matter, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, is the slogan, and Colin Kaepernick is the face of this campaign. I can't think of anything more ridiculously stupid for Nike to do, but they did it. And
I won't be buying Nike products anymore.
No, I won't either. And the first person of influence to publicly support the campaign was former Iranian president
Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and then last night, John Brennan, the former CIA director. So that's quite the collection there behind the effort to back these kneelers in the NFL against the national anthem. It's pretty unbelievable. So you've got the deep state and the Iranian regime. Okay, great, good job, Nike. Quite
Matt,
a day for you guys, right?
When I think about sacrifice in athletics, I think about Pat Tillman, not Colin Kaepernick.
Right.
So,
same here.
It's embarrassing. So anyway, Matt, it's always a pleasure, buddy. Thank you, and I can't wait to catch up with the rest of these hearings because this is some
all right, thanks, Kurt.
Out of this world stuff. Take care.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
The real thing that the left is angry about is they're like, how could you allow these Russian memes? Somebody saw a meme and then they decided they had to vote for Trump. Or it must have been fake news. And by fake news, they mean conservative websites. Come on. But this is what the left thinks. Fake news. And by fake news, what they mean is shut down Breitbart.
Breitbart News Tonight. Weeknights starting at 9 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125. We want to hear from you. Tweet the show at Garrick38. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Joining me from Armed American Radio, Mark Walters, and from Breitbart News and host of his own podcast, Bullets with A.W.R. Hawkins, is A.W.R. Hawkins. Morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. How are you?
Hey, I want to read something, and I want to get your reaction afterwards. 8 people were shot Saturday, including a 30-year-old woman who was shot in the back of the head while standing in an alley. About 20 minutes later, another murder occurred in the same area. On Sunday, 10 people were shot, 2 were killed. An 11-year-old girl was shot while standing outside with a 17-year-old girl just before 11 p.m. They were standing in the West Pullman neighborhood when someone drove by and opened fire. The 11-year-old was shot in the chest. Breitbart News reported 28 were shot last weekend in Rahm Emanuel, Chicago. Over 50 were shot over the weekend of August 18th to 21st, and 6 people were killed. The shooting victims include 3 who were shot at a, believe it or not, peace picnic Saturday. At least 33 people were shot during the weekend of August 10th through the morning of the 13th. Over 70 were shot from the 3rd through the 6th, and 11 of them died. We're looking at over 1,000 shootings so far in this. We're not talking about Pakistan or Kabul, Afghanistan, or we're talking about the United States, and we're talking about the city of Chicago. A.W., seriously, I mean, how is this being allowed to go on?
Well, I mean, it simply doesn't get covered except at outlets like Breitbart and other outlets that try to just present the truth without spinning it. In all honesty, apart from that, it's not covered because CNN and other outlets, they can't report this because it undercuts their template of pro-gun control. Gun control is the solution. They're sure of it, even though we know it's not. So they don't report it. But, I've done another report, Kurt, since the one you're reading from. By the time the weekend was ended, you had 25-plus people shot, and in addition to that, not including, but in addition to that, at least 6 killed. And one of those was a doctoral student that was entering Northwestern University. The fact that he's a doctoral student doesn't mean his life was more valuable than the 30-year-old woman who was killed. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is anybody that finds themselves on the south side of Chicago enters a war zone. And we've got to wake up and realize that I've said it a million times, gun control is inhumane, and there's no other way to put it.
It speaks to, again, this is far deadlier than many places that are war zones in the Middle East, Mark. But the message that, and you and I and AW and I and you and AW and everybody and Cam Edwards, God bless him. I know he had a family issue over the last week, and I want to make sure everybody understands our thoughts and prayers are out to him. But the fact of the matter is, are all these murders and all these shootings being allowed to take place for that simple fact? Is it really because the left is not covering this because they don't want the message to get out that gun control doesn't work? Is that really why these people are dying and not being reported?
Yes. Let me mention another number here. 1,000 human beings, fellow Americans, Chicagoans, have been shot. 1,000 since Memorial Day. Since Memorial Day. Go back and do the math and count the days. That's what we're talking about in Chicago. And to answer your question, yes, it's not a conspiracy. It's not Democrats in Chicago getting together. It's not Rahm Emanuel getting together saying, let's let these people kill each other because of this. What it is these people are so hyper-partisan that their partisanship, that their agenda, as AWR alluded to when you talk about when he talked just a couple moments ago about the failure of it, that it undercuts the template. He's exactly 100% right. They simply can't report it, and they can't do anything about it because their agenda is more important than the 1,000 people I just mentioned that are shot between Memorial Day. They actually, and I don't know if truly believe that they can do something about it, but the fact of the matter is that the agenda, the political agenda, is far more important than those 1,000 people, and that's pretty sad and pathetic and frightening in America today.
Well, hey guys, I'm gonna introduce race into this conversation, and I want to ask you a question, AW. All right, and this is right. There's no hidden meaning here. If the 1,000 people plus people that have been shot were all white, would this be a news story, AW?
Well, it would. If they were white and had a different zip code, you betcha. But I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think basically, if they were white alone, as you phrase it, that would be enough. We've learned that this is just how it goes. That black folks kill black folks in Chicago, and that's just how it goes. But that's not true. People who look at Chicago and have watched Democrat policies, not just under Emanuel, but under Daley before him, these people have been segregated in Chicago. They've been, I don't know a better way to put it than this way, they've been locked to a area of the city. And it's just like a diesel engine. You know, a diesel engine, instead of using a spark plug, uses a combination of pressure and heat, and it makes the fuel explode. That's what's happening. There's so much combustion going on here, the way they're trapped one upon another in certain areas of Chicago, it's just combusting. And this is all an outgrowth of Democrat policies, from the segregation of these people to the gun control. All of it together is causing this mess. And every outlet should be covering it. Every outlet should be shaming Rahm Emanuel, but only a few, including Breitbart, are, and it needs to be a greater number doing it.
Hey, Mark, let me ask you this, because this is where I'm kind of going with this. The left purports that the rest of the world, the conservatives in the world, are the racists, the bigots, the anti-Semites, and all the other bullcrap that they pile on us. Is this not proof positive that they are, in fact, the people that are racist? And I say that, of course, in the context of this. If these people were white, this would be on CNN and MSNBC and ABC News and every other news outlet. But that they're not speaks volumes about the priorities of the left and the media and the agenda.
Well, you just answered that same question. It's the agenda. You said the word right. The agenda is more important than these 1,000 people shot between. And I'm just using the example because I think it's mind-boggling. It's hard to wrap your head around when you say 1,000 people shot between Memorial Day and Labor Day in Chicago. That's just that can't be a real number, but it is. The number is more than 1,000, but who's counting?
Right.
If you want an answer to that question, ask Al Sharpton why he's not marching on the streets in Chicago every day. Ask Louis Farrakhan why he's not marching in the streets of Chicago every day. Ask Jesse Jackson from Chicago why he's not calling for Rahm Emanuel's head because of these numbers in Chicago every day. And AWR is 100% right. If that zip code were 90210, I think we all know the answer to that question.
Right. Right. No, and they're not marching on the streets of Chicago because it's too damn dangerous. I mean, and I'm not saying that.
Well, ask David Hogg where he is. Where the
That's
hell
exactly
are you?
right.
AWR is right. They can't talk about it. It undercuts their template. It exposes them for what they are. It's the sad reality is that they cannot report a human interest story of a police officer being saved by a white police officer being saved from a black assailant trying to kill him by a black armed, lawfully concealed carry armed American, because that story undercuts their template so much so, they've put politics so much so above this, above human life, that they can't even report it for fear of being outed for the hypocrites they are. And, you know, Chuck Todd in his little article that he wrote, you know, whining and crying about the media the other day because of Roger Ailes and nobody gives him a fair shake anymore because it's, you know, their objective and nobody else can understand it. Might want to take a look at the years and years and years of biased reporting that have led to this, that we've gotten to this point in America today.
Well, they're absolutely complicit in this.
Of course they are, 100%.
Yep. AW, you and I, well, all three of us have talked in the past about DG use, defensive gun use, and there was a study put out that was covered up in the mid-'90s. Professor Kleck at Florida State has issued a report. I always felt like maybe, you know, hey, 2.4 million, that just sounds like a little bit much. That sounds excessive. But AW, I got to hand it to you. You're pretty consistent reporting on a daily basis, not weekly, not monthly, but on a daily basis of multiple events occurring every single day where a law-abiding citizen who is legally armed kills a criminal, defends their life against a criminal and kills him, from a 90-year-old woman to a 24-year-old Uber driver. It is real. That is the country we are living in. The Second Amendment saves far more lives than it's ever taken in the sense of what it was there for, number one. But I wanted to ask you, recently I just saw a story about the Uber driver who used a gun, a lawfully carried weapon, a legally owned gun, used it to defend their lives. And Uber suspended the driver. Is that am I reading that right?
You are reading it right. And Uber made that move after the sheriff of Polk County, Sheriff Grady Judd, came right out and said, look, this is classic stand your ground stuff here. And Grady Judd said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, it's a new day, folks. He said, if you're used to bullying people, if you're a bigger man used to grabbing smaller men and throwing them down on the concrete, he went through this list of if you're used to doing these things. He said, you better change your ways or else your life will end, because people are tired of being pushed around. Exactly. And his point was the guy who swerved at the Uber driver came back at the Uber driver and allegedly said to him, I have a gun, and told him things he was going to do to him once he got up on him. So the Uber driver shot him and killed him before he got the chance. And the sheriff has said, look, this was justified in all of this, and after all of that, Uber suspended him.
Yeah, and so let's be clear. One of the reasons I'm assuming is that Uber must I'm pretty sure Uber has a policy that their drivers are not allowed, even if they legally own a firearm, they're not supposed to be carrying as Uber drivers. Or there's some, even though I'm going to argue that stay with me, guys, Mark. The Senate confirmation hearings for Justice Kavanaugh today are in direct relation to potentially this story, because I would imagine as an Uber driver, I'm not sure if a company can abridge my constitutional rights in that sense. But this is the case I could see where a lawsuit would end up getting to the Supreme Court, and this just once again reaffirms why we all voted for Donald Trump, if for no other reason than for Justice Gorsuch and now potentially Justice Kavanaugh. Mark?
Let me, Kurt, if I may jump in on the Uber thing for just a second.
Yes, please.
First of all, no company has the moral authority. And let's focus on Uber here. Uber does not possess the moral authority to tell a man or woman who chooses to work for them that they've agreed to hire to allow to represent them in their own vehicle where they happen to be at whatever times they choose to work for Uber on their behalf. Uber does not possess the moral authority to tell that individual that they do not have a right to carry a constitutionally recognized utility, a tool, a firearm, to defend themselves and their fare in their own vehicle, in their own town, wherever they happen to live, as long as that vehicle in their car abides by the state law and those people are licensed, whatever they have to do to abide by state law. Uber possesses no moral authority to tell that individual they cannot do that. And this driver in Florida understood that. And if you're listening to the sound of my voice right now and you drive for Uber and you're not carrying a firearm because of their policy, you're a damn fool. Uber does not possess the moral authority to tell you that you cannot defend yourself. And if Uber wants to fire you for that, then you have to ask yourself a serious question. What's more important, Uber's policy or my life and the life of my fare? That answers that question.
Yeah. Well, and so the question becomes then, AW, Uber doesn't possess the moral authority, but did they possess the legal authority? And I'm not asking you to answer that question as a lawyer, AW. What I'm asking is, doesn't this speak back to Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch? Uber doesn't possess the moral authority. I'm going to argue they don't possess the legal authority. If I'm abiding by every single right, I don't believe a company can change what my rights are based on the vehicle I'm sitting in. Number one, but more again. AW, you and I have talked about this, Mark. We talked about this national reciprocity and all of the things that are happening and have happened since the Trump election. Justice Gorsuch and now Justice Kavanaugh, they're going to be players in this game at some point soon, are they not?
They are. And like you were saying about the legal authority, there are a lot of things involved here because the Uber driver drives his own car.
Right.
And so you're in your own car. I don't really know how much authority anyone has to tell you what you can and can't in your own car. But this is going to be the kind of case, I think you're exactly right, Curt. This is the kind of case that if someone will bring it, it's going to make its way to that Supreme Court. And when it does, what you said, everything that we said about Donald Trump going toward the election will come to fruition in one moment because we'll see that Donald Trump did the most fabulous job in the world of securing the Supreme Court and literally, I'm not exaggerating, literally securing our gun rights for decades to come. He did that with Supreme Court nominees. If we can get Kavanaugh on, it's a new day in America. It just really is.
Well, and I got to tell you, guys, Mark, this feels to me like, so basically what Uber is saying is if you put the Uber sticker on your car, you lose the right to bear arms.
Well, but keep in mind, to answer the question, Uber does not have lawmaking capabilities. Uber is not a lawmaking body. Uber cannot make law. If that were the case, Sheriff Grady Judd would have had to arrest the driver for violating Uber's law. There is no Uber law. Right. What it is corporate policy. It's simply their policy.
Well, and we're again, Mark,
carry a gun.
We're not talking about a taxi cab driver where the cab is owned by the company. We're talking about a transportation service where the vehicle is your own. And
your own vehicle. It's absolutely your own vehicle. A taxi cab company that owns the cab, for example, can say to you, and truck drivers, I spent 26 years in the truck business. We'll go there. This matters. Yep. If you drive a truck and you drive their truck, and it's not your truck, you're not an owner-operator, you drive their truck, you have to abide by their policy. And if you want to carry a gun in your cab, then you understand that you're violating the company policy, and if you get caught, you may be fired. That's a decision you have to make. You're not going to be arrested because it's not a law. It's their company policy. They're going to fire you. And, what Grady Judd said, I'm no fan of Grady Judd. Haven't been for a long time. Grady Judd, he likes the right to bear arms as long as it's on his terms. I've played for many times when he was the head of the Florida Sheriff's Association, the president. He's the reason Florida doesn't have open carry right now. He likes the right to bear arms, and he truly does. And I like what he said in this particular case. But he likes the right to bear arms on his terms. Okay, but make it very clear, he was great, and his statement was absolutely spot on. What he said, true. Good people with guns are going to do you harm. Don't do this in our community.
I got to tell you, before I close up, guys, every time we get into this conversation, every time this argument comes to the forefront, I can never get away from the simplistic saying that absolutely makes the left go batshit crazy. Nothing stops a bad guy with a gun but a good guy with a gun. And honest to God, AW, every story you write, that's exactly at the heart of, no matter what the details around the story are, that's exactly how this plays out 100% of the time. And the left hates that it's not more complicated than that.
Right. Well, and if you want to put an exclamation mark on this discussion, exclamation point, think about this. What would have happened to that Uber driver if he hadn't been armed? See, that's the left's outcome. That's the outcome the left leads us toward. What would have happened? It's horrible to think of what would have happened. But the way it turned out is the good guy stopped the bad guy, and it's all because he had a gun.
Yep. Now, guys, it's always a pleasure. I enjoy we never get enough time but I would love to talk to more and at length, because I think that there's a need for people like us to travel the country and talk at colleges and schools and educate our young people, not on the love and the awesomeness of carrying a gun, but on the responsibilities and what a society can do for itself if everybody has the right and the ability to protect their own lives and defend themselves. So, guys, always a pleasure. Thank you, guys. Take care. Have a great week.
Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you.
Wanted to close out today with something very, very simple. And I want to talk about the word hypocrisy as it relates to the world we live in these days. If you flip on any channel right now and go to the confirmation hearings that will take place over the next 5 days, 2 weeks, you will see the definition, the textbook definition of hypocrisy. The Democrats, during the confirmation hearing of Judge Sonia Sotomayor, made it very clear, in no uncertain terms, two things. The American Bar Association is the gold standard for which judges should be judged and voted on by for the Supreme Court, number one. And number two, the length of paper trail, the volume of a paper trail of rulings that a judge nominated for the court that they have made in their past is a clear indicator of their qualifications. Judge Kavanaugh has made 307 rulings and written 307 decisions, in which is more than the last 5 justices combined, number one. And number two, the ABA, the American Bar Association, has given Judge Kavanaugh their highest rating. The 2 litmus tests for the Democrats to be a judge on the Supreme Court, not only does he pass them, he passes them surpassing anything the left has seen in the last 4 or 5 nominations. By every standard they put out there, he is qualified, and there's no doubt this man is so far beyond qualified. Now, what's happening is they're using process, right? There's, I guess, over 1 million pages of documentation in his past. They're asking for it all, none of which they can read, nor do they actually even care. It's to slow down the process. But the fact of the matter is, this is what Democrats do. This is who they are. And I want you to, if you get a chance, and I know this stuff is not fun to watch, but please watch a few minutes of this to understand that this is what we're fighting against. We're fighting against a side that doesn't care about truth and the American way and honesty and integrity and intellectual honesty. We're fighting against the group. And remember, during the primary or during the general election, they said that we were voting for Trump because we were putting party over country. Is there no better example of the Democrats putting party over country than this? A supremely qualified Supreme Court nominee is being voted down by Democrats because, and let's be very honest about this, there's no argument, no debate, no one would, only an idiot would argue this. This is 100% about the left's ability to have abortion on demand, period. Nothing else. Nothing else. The Affordable Care Act is going to kill itself. It's going to self-implode. It's going to self-destruct because it would destroy the middle class were it allowed to be carried on. But the fact of the matter is, this is just like the Women's March. The women were marching on New York in their pink hats for rights that they still had and had the day before, and they still have today. But for some reason, they were marching about the rights. This is about the right to have an abortion when and how you choose to have one. And abortion, by the way, is a slang for black genocide because Planned Parenthood has been the center of the destruction of the black community since its inception. Look at the hundreds of thousands and millions of lives terminated by Planned Parenthood, and a significant chunk of them, a very large chunk, are from black communities. So anyway, take a peek, guys. God bless. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate you guys catching up and hanging out, and look forward to catching up with you guys tomorrow. God bless. Have a great day.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
Everything in hip-hop is not bad. Kanye agreed with us, so let's love him today until he raps tomorrow and you turn your back. Because if you jump off when the fun of the moment is over, then you are in fact making Kanye the token he is accused of being. So please, don't do that. Don't go there.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.